Well, welcome everyone. My name is Keith Brandt. I'm the Vice Chancellor for University Relations at UC Santa Cruz, and it's a pleasure to be here back in LA. We're committed to being here at least annually and more, and we've brought you tonight a great array of students and faculty speakers that I hope you'll really enjoy. How many of you are alumni? Good. Well, welcome alumni. We're actually delighted to have you. We hope you'll get back to campus too. We have an alumni weekend at the end of April if you want to consider coming up for an awesome weekend of fun. How many of you are current, former, or possibly future parents of students? So, okay, they're clustered in the back there. Yeah, that's great. We have, in addition to alumni and parents and some friends, we have some actually prospective students in the audience tonight, people who have been admitted to UC Santa Cruz and are trying to make those decisions before May 1st about where they want to attend. We continue to have record applicants and are admitting the most well-prepared and qualified students ever. So we're just excited about the incoming class who will be joining us. So you may have noticed that our theme on campus this year is a rich tradition of non-traditional thinking, which is the way we like to think of Santa Cruz. And among that is the legacy of Rachel Carson. And Rachel Carson this year is something we're celebrating. You may have heard that the former College 8 is now Rachel Carson College as of September. And what was truly heartwarming about that was a gift from a family to name the college, and they didn't want to name it after their family. They wanted to name it after somebody significant that tied into the environmental movement, and they selected Rachel Carson. For those of you who are not aware of her, she's the crusading scientist and author whose work on the impact of pesticides inspired the environmental movement. And what's kind of fun is we're introducing a whole new group of students on Rachel Carson and who she was. And she embodied, we feel, so much of what we do at UC Santa Cruz and what we value: rigorous scientific research, environmental stewardship, advocacy, social justice, and public service. Some of us were talking earlier about recently the American Experience did a documentary on PBS about Rachel Carson. It was really, I thought it was nicely done. It really illustrated both her work and her personal life. And she was, she was just a pioneer, a woman doing pioneer work in what was very much a man's field at that time, and she took a stand and stood her ground in the face of fierce attacks. And for all those reasons, we feel her legacy is really linked to our history and our work today and where our students and faculty are going in the future. So tonight, I hope you'll see within the speakers tonight, there's the Rachel Carson theme comes through, and in fact, a number of the speakers will actually reference her. So we have 5 talks for you this evening with common threads woven throughout and linked in some way to Rachel Carson. So each speaker is going to talk for about 10 minutes-ish, and then we're going to hold questions to the end. And then so save your questions to the end, and we'll do a Q&A with the entire group of panelists. All right? So here we go. This is we're kind of doing the TED style, so keep it moving. No time to get settled in. So first up is Justine Smith. Justine is a graduate student working with Professor Chris Wilmers and the Santa Cruz Puma Project. She's graduating in June, heading to Berkeley for postdoc work with pumas in Patagonia. Before she goes, she's here to talk to us about how we can coexist with these very large carnivores in our midst, and right here in Santa Monica Mountains, right? So, Justine.
You might recognize this puma, right? If you don't, his name is P22, and he lives in the middle of Los Angeles in Griffith Park, isolated from all other pumas and surrounded by urbanization. P22 has single-handedly educated millions of people about the stresses that large carnivores face when they live among us. But P22's incredible journey to the city is not the whole story, and his life has not been easy. Now, to help put you in P22's shoes, I want you to imagine a zombie apocalypse. Now, bear with me on this, but I want you to imagine that zombies are taking over your towns, you're fearful for your children, and you have to learn to hide in the shadows. That is a lot like how pumas and other carnivores perceive us invading their habitat. We pose novel and profound risks to carnivores. We take their habitat, we shoot them, we hit them with cars. Pumas are responsible for killing 6 people in California since 1890, yet we kill 100 pumas per year for eating livestock in California alone. So although you might think that these big toothy animals are scary, we're much more dangerous to them than they are to us. Now, as Keith mentioned, I work with the Santa Cruz Puma Project, which has been studying pumas in the Santa Cruz Mountains since 2008. And as you know, P22 does not live in the Santa Cruz Mountains, but many pumas like him do, and they face similar challenges. The Santa Cruz Puma Project is working to understand how and when coexistence works between humans and pumas and what that looks like. And today, I'd like to walk you through this coexistence story through the eyes of Santa Cruz pumas. This might be what you imagine puma habitat to look like: rugged, mountainous, and wild. But pumas can also live here, in your backyard. Pumas are what biologists call a generalist species. They can live in lots of different habitat types and eat lots of different prey. They actually have the greatest north to south range of any terrestrial mammal, ranging from Alaska to Patagonia. And this generality is what allows them to adapt to the human environment. Like this puma 48M. These are GPS locations from 48M. The M stands for male. And he regularly uses this neighborhood in Ben Lomond to travel and to hunt. And so for 48M, learning to adapt to people means learning how to use our habitats. But adaptation is not always a good thing. And my research looks at how pumas respond to human stressors and what the consequences of those responses are. In my work, I've found that pumas spend less time at their kill sites when they hunt in residential areas, meaning they give up feeding opportunities. Here's an example of what that looks like. This is a GPS track from Puma 29F. She regularly hunts in the neighborhoods of Felton and Bonnie Doon. And in this case, she made a kill right over here at this cluster of GPS points. But you'll see that she doesn't stay at her kill. All these lines across the screen shows that she regularly leaves during the daytime when people are active to rest far away. Now, why isn't she comfortable staying at her kill site? Well, because she made it here in full view of a house. And I've found that pumas like 29F that live in more residential areas have to kill 40% more deer per year to compensate for the energy lost from these behaviors. Now, starting to look at these patterns got me wondering, what were pumas actually responding to? Certainly they have good reason to be afraid of us, but there's also a lot of other new and weird things in residential areas, like cars and dogs and children and lawnmowers and coffee grinders, lots of new sounds that only exist in neighborhoods. And I wanted to know, do pumas actually perceive us as predators? Do they fear us directly? So I did what any reasonable conservation scientist would do, and I played pumas talk radio. Now, to set this up a little bit, I'll explain our experiment. We wanted to expose pumas to different sounds and measure their responses to see what they were afraid of. To do that, we had to be able to figure out where a puma would go, which is actually really difficult because they have huge home ranges and can move 10 kilometers a day. So what we did was we went to fresh kill sites where we thought the pumas were still feeding and would return that night. Then at these kill sites, we set up motion-censored cameras like this one here, that were linked to speakers. So when the camera came on, the speaker also projected a sound. The first sound we played was a non-threatening sound of the native Pacific chorus frog. And we did that to make sure the pumas weren't just afraid of amplified noise. And then we played pumas talk radio. What the goal was to expose pumas to conversational human speech, the most benign form of human disturbance. And I won't disclose to you how long it took to find clips where the hosts were not shouting, but we were successful. And I'd like to show you an example of one of these experimental trials. This is 66M standing over a kill that he made the night before that's buried right here. So you can see that he appears to notice the recording, but doesn't dramatically respond to it. He continues to feed on his kill. And now you'll see his response to human speech. 66M actually did not return to feed anymore on this carcass. And this was ubiquitous across the pumas that we did this experiment on. They were not afraid of the sound of frogs, but they consistently fled from the sound of humans, and many of them completely abandoned the carcass. Now, this is important because, number one, it tells us that they do fear people directly. But number two, it also substantiates our previous work, that disturbance from humans reduces feeding by pumas, costing them much-needed energy. Now, why is energy important? Well, as you can imagine, it takes a lot of energy to raise kittens. And we've found that although pumas will move and hunt in residential areas, they choose to den farther away in more rugged and pristine habitats. Now, that could be due to the fact that they're afraid of us, or that it's just too energetically costly to live around us when you're raising kittens. But either way, one thing we know for certain is that seeing a puma walk down your street does not mean that human habitats are suitable for important reproductive behaviors, like raising kittens. We're only beginning to understand how humans instill fear in carnivores and what the consequences of that is. But we need to start paying attention if we want to coexist with these animals. And that means we have to co-adapt. We have to meet in the middle. Pumas are doing their part to adapt to us. They are learning how and when to avoid us, and they generously don't treat us as their prey. But we also have to do our part to adapt to them if we want to continue to share landscapes with them. And that's not always been easy. In the 20th century, the United States saw widespread bounty hunting of pumas, wolves, and grizzly bears, and we extirpated these species from the majority of their ranges in the United States. Even today, we continue to persecute and hunt these animals on a large scale, and aside from that, we've transformed their habitat. But there's also a positive note, and support for carnivore conservation is on the rise. And that is the legacy of P22, who has become the poster child of urban carnivore conservation. Interest in P22 is helping to make an overpass over the 101 a reality at Liberty Canyon that would connect the Santa Monica Mountains to other puma habitats. Here's a conceptualization of what that bridge would look like. And this land bridge would cost $60 million to implement. So it needs all the public support it can get, and interest in P22 is helping to make it happen. In the Santa Cruz Mountains, we're conducting similar initiatives. This is a location on Highway 17 called Laurel Curve, where our project has found many pumas try to cross the freeway, some successfully and some unsuccessfully. We've provided these data to the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County, and they're trying to put a wildlife underpass here at this location. And like Liberty Canyon and P22, we also have our own poster child for this project. His name is 16M, and he crossed Laurel Curve 30 times over the course of his life. He's the only animal we've ever documented to actually have Highway 17 bisect his home range. And this scar on his haunch, that's from being hit by a car a year before this photo was taken. So the Santa Cruz locals affectionately named him Atlas, and interest in his story have also helped to support our Wildlife Underpass project. But the irony of 16M is that he did not die from being hit by a car. He was shot for eating a goat. And at the Santa Cruz Puma Project, we're dedicated to encouraging coexistence between livestock owners and large carnivores. We've hosted workshops to help share ideas about best ways to protect livestock, and we often talk one-on-one with landowners about best practices like having sheds with a roof and a door to protect livestock at night. We're also dedicated to educating the next generation of conservation scientists. We've trained over 100 undergraduates in field, lab, and analytical techniques because we know that the conservation work that we do will need to extend well beyond our careers, and we're counting on them to continue this mission. As humans continue to fragment and disturb landscapes, we need to think about not only preserving habitats, but also preserving carnivore behavior, so we don't have to force them to live in fear. In the Santa Cruz Mountains, pumas are doing their part to adapt to us. But it's our turn to show that we're ready to do ours, and that's what we're doing at the Santa Cruz Puma Project. Thank you.
I'm reminded that when I first got to Santa Cruz, I would get calls from the physics and math faculty that all we do is run stories about the pumas and the sea lions. And it's like, well, if you give us some cute animal videos, we can run your stories too. Next up, our next speakers are Daniel Guevara and Claudio Campagna, and they are a duet tonight. They are collaborating on a project called The Language of Conservation. Daniel is a philosopher. Claudio is a conservation biologist. They met 7 years ago through a shared interest in the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. They discovered a mutual fascination with the mortality of human-induced extinction and language. Language both expresses thought and also determines it. Language guides and channels what we believe and value. Although they're not theater professors, they have opted to present their ideas as dialogue in 4 acts. Let's open with Act 1, You Shall Not Kill Humans.
Thank you. I'm glad you said we're not professional actors because you would have been totally fooled by that. And we should call it conservation tongue twisters or something. We also don't have a professional stage setting, so you imagine with us this is my messy office. And the first act is about ethics and humans.
And I'm the conservation biologist, so I'm using my binoculars so you don't confuse me for the philosopher. Daniel, I read your paper, and it intrigues me. I like it very much. You know that I spent about 30 years of my life in beautiful Patagonia. There, I'm alone. I'm in the field. I'm away from cities. And I think about the future of nature. Troubles me what is at risk today, the prospect of so many species going extinct due to us. And I want to do something because I have ethical concerns.
Ethical, Claudio, we've been over this so many times. It's hard enough for humans, now species. But at least I'm glad philosophy's not dead.
Well, I hope not, because, I'm a species conservationist. I care about forms of life being threatened, particularly, the African elephants, everybody knows about them, but many other, frogs and sharks. And I want to know what is lost when a species goes extinct because of us. That's my question. And I feel that it's a kind of tragedy, but I cannot find words to express it.
You can't find words. Who can? Maybe the most honest thing to say here is something that some Wittgensteinian philosophers call the painfully inexplicable.
Well, Wittgenstein, I love him, and the painfully inexplicable, fine, inexplicable, because really I don't have language to express what is lost when a species goes extinct because of us. But that's difficult because we are talking philosophy, and sometimes there's no one simple answer for questions like, for example, why do we all agree that it is bad to kill an innocent human? Do you have one answer to that?
It's not as simple as people suppose, and no, there isn't just one thing. Philosophers like to emphasize that we have maybe a special capacity for empathy for our own kind, that we're self-conscious, that we're rational beings who can reflect on our own lives.
Yes, and many would say that it's bad to kill an innocent human because we are creatures of God. But if one does not believe in God, and also somebody could say, yes, we are sentient species, we feel pain and happiness, but gorillas are sentient species too. Yet we do kill sentient species, often for fun, for nothing. What makes us special?
Again, philosophers like to emphasize things like that we can experience a special kind of happiness or sorrow because we can reflect on our experiences.
But what do we really know about the experiences of other animals? In short, I need to have an answer to, indisputably, if it were possible, to the question, why is bad to kill an innocent human? I cannot believe it is just because it is illegal.
No, not just that, obviously. But indisputable, Claudio, we're not doing exact science here. You want something categorical, like Kant, you're so old-fashioned. Let's see. You want something that's contrary to reason. Well, Kant would say, okay, imagine a world in which everybody thought it was okay to kill innocent people. That would be a crazy world.
Well, I did not know that I was old-fashioned. I truly believe, I understand that perhaps the source of our obligation cannot be God or our feelings or certainly the law, but I want to believe that it's reason. That reason requires us not to kill an innocent human.
But you know from my paper that philosophers like to think of hard cases to test any supposedly indisputable rule, even one that you ought not to kill an innocent person. But okay, maybe one thing that everyone can agree on is that we do want to put great moral weight on human goodness.
Act number 2. Act 2 is going to try to apply moral theory to non-human species. You'll see we'll get in trouble. Human goodness, fine. Could human goodness help me understand why it's bad to kill an innocent human? But what about other species? For example, does human goodness require us not to kill a gorilla because it's a sentient species?
Moral theories don't put the same weight on gorillas' lives as ours, again, because they're not rational agents like us.
But as far as I understand, the animal rights movement argues against that kind of discrimination. They would try to expand the idea of justice to apply to dogs or to gorillas.
Yes, they were the first to try to apply the language of rights and equality to the other creatures, but even they can't stretch it so far as to apply to everything. Say, Jainism, you know, that religion where they go to great lengths not to harm any living thing. Maybe that's extreme, but frankly, I don't know how the theories could stretch to apply to everything that even you want to conserve, Claudio.
So, if somebody kills a gorilla, a poor innocent gorilla, just for fun, we cannot say too much about it. We cannot say, for example, that this person committed murder.
No, but when you see things like that, it's hard to consider the reasons why. Consider what would happen if someone killed the last gorilla on the planet for fun.
The same thing. If a person that kills a gorilla spends some time in jail or pays a fine, if that person would kill the last gorilla, would not be different. It would be a fine or a little time in jail.
Right, so there's certainly something wrong with somebody who would kill the last gorilla on the planet for fun, but they wouldn't be considered to have participated in a genocide.
I would say the opposite. I would say that many people, like trophy hunters, for example, would be ready to pay good money to go on and kill a lion or kill a gorilla just for fun, and considering that perhaps a little bit of that money is going to go on and save other animals. But I very much dislike this kind of thinking.
I know, Claudio, it's called the instrumentalist or consequentialist view of life, which you've always disliked. It's, you know, the means is justified by what's best overall. And as you've shown me many times, it's the language that's taking over conservation today: sustainable development, natural capital, ecosystem services.
I know, I've been using that language for years. I don't trust it anymore. It only deepens my ethical dilemmas. It forces me to think about nature only in terms of costs and benefits.
Right, and you refuse to speak that language anymore. But let's see how far you're willing to take that. I kill one innocent human being to use their organs to save 10 others.
No, do not kill.
But if I can
Let
save
them die.
But if I can save 100 or 1,000?
I don't like what you're saying. I don't like talking like this.
Right, because you don't do cost-benefit analysis with human lives. All right, let's try this. Gorillas. One gorilla for 10 zebras.
No,
10 zebras for 20 milk cows.
no,
One tick for a whole redwood forest.
no. Trade-offs are not acceptable for me here.
Right, and you feel, well, actually you remind me of Saintly Alyosha and that Dostoevsky's novel. You know, he's not willing to compromise his values for anything, not even universal peace and harmony. But let's consider what you're saying. You don't want to use instrumentalist language anymore.
No, I feel trapped.
You feel trapped and there are no alternatives. And what
Yeah.
am I offering you from traditional moral theory? Very little. It looks like moral theory is thin for humans, thinner still for gorillas.
And is non-existent for life in general. So trees and bugs, forget about them. Sometimes I lose my optimism.
But you know we're both pathological optimists, Claudio. Act 3. This should really be called the limits of language. And you'll see why, I hope. Anyway, I'm giving Claudio a hard time because he's asking some very hard questions. Maybe he's been out there talking to the animals for too long. But he has an important point that even a lot of philosophers don't get. And it's that language isn't just about communication, but it predisposes our thought, even our thought about what's good and what's evil.
In fact, let's give an example. The anti-slavery movement could have never been established on a discourse that considers humans as property. The language of freedom was essential there.
Yes, language shapes our principles and limits them. You can't derive from a language that denigrates a people respect for them.
If you talk all day long about other creatures as inferior, as lacking a mind, lacking a soul, you're going to be predisposed to treat them only in ways that are useful for us.
So we should just stop. We should change the way we think and speak about nature.
Absolutely, change the language. Where do we start? That's easy to say. Is Thoreau, Leopold, Carson?
They were wonderful, Claudio, but they're not appreciated in the way they should today. But you do find echoes of their voices in unexpected places. Have you seen the book by the Pope on conservation? It's pretty good.
Right, yeah, I read it. It's Laudato Si. I like the Pope. He's an Argentine like me. But if one does not believe in God again, if one is not a Catholic,
You still both like plants and animals.
oh, but there are so many people in this world that do not appreciate nature.
You guys both like sentient species.
Are we going back to Act 1?
Yeah. We are, Claudio, and I think we have to recognize that we're at a moral stage in this area comparable to the one when humanity was finally starting to question things like people as property.
Act 4, last one.
Act 4, Wittgenstein. I won't even say Ludwig. Wittgenstein. And the only thing I can say about this act is that it's an impossibly brief introduction to Wittgenstein. Claudio, you're a conservationist who sees how language is central to the crisis of life. How many conservationists like that are out there?
I think that too many conservationists are happy to use the language of economics. They think that that language has traction and play that game. They talk assets, stakeholders, offsets.
Well, then let's spread the good news. Conservationists of the world unite. Quit the dominant discourse.
Well, at least quit the discourse that is actually confusing us when we are trying to talk ethics in relation to species going extinct. We have to find something new.
Well, maybe we should return to Wittgenstein for a moment here.
It's not bad. I mean, he's the first one that actually told us how language can confuse our thinking, our philosophy.
And I think that he would say the language of, what were you just saying, stakeholders, assets, offsets, natural capital, ecosystem services, even the iconic term sustainable development. I think it's something that he would call a good example of what he called the bewitchment of our intelligence by means of our language.
It is a language that hit a dead end, I believe. Certainly, it does not help me to answer the question, what is lost, morally lost, when a species goes extinct? Have you heard of Svetlana Alexievich, Daniel?
2015 Nobel Prize winner for literature. Why?
Because I think that Svetlana found the voice to tell us the story of Chernobyl, as nobody has done before. She is not trying to move us with statistics or facts, but with the everyday language of the victims.
Yes, devastating. I see what you mean. It reminds me of Solzhenitsyn, whose writings, as much as anything, probably brought down the Gulag.
Well, you're mentioning another great author there, another great writer. I believe that what they have in common is they mastered a language that has been silenced by philosophy during a long time.
Silent Spring. I'm surprised I'm saying this, but maybe what we need is less philosophy, more Rachel Carson.
Probably more Carson, certainly less Wall Street.
And Aldo Leopold, the great conservationist, maybe is the one who saw it a long time ago and said it best, that we're at a frontier of values that are yet uncaptured by language.
Thank you.
Reminded me of one of those late night conversations in the dorms. The theme of language is carried on with our next speaker, Emma Hiolski. Emma earned her PhD in environmental toxicology from UC Santa Cruz and is now a student in our amazing science communication program. It's the only graduate science writing program in the US that requires both a degree in science and experience in research. She's following the lead of many others who've gone on to become science reporters and editors at the nation's top news outlets, familiar names like Richard Harris and Joe Palca of NPR. Our SciComm graduates land coveted jobs at magazines, news services, research agencies, universities, medical centers. We know that Rachel Carson was first and foremost a writer and the author of Silent Spring. Her words drove policy, gave birth to a populist movement, and led to the formation of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Hopefully that agency continues on strong. In short, words matter. Here's Emma.
I'm here to share the story of a story that I wrote last fall for the San Jose Mercury News. This story spans a century of coastal resource management in California and covers the shifting sands of balancing industrial development with natural resource preservation. And the key word here is sand. This is the story of a sand mine on the beach in Marina, a small coastal town in Northern California, about 40 miles south of Santa Cruz and a few towns north of Monterey. We often think of sand as a wonderful amenity of beach living, but it is also an important and incredibly valuable commodity. 100 years ago, there were 5 sand mines in Marina. This one joined their ranks in 1965, but it is the only one left today, a reminder of an era when parts of our coastline were industrial zones. You don't see sand mines in Santa Monica today, and in fact, there are no other coastal sand mines anywhere else in the United States. Now, this mine, the Lapis plant, is nestled in the dunes just west of Highway 1 in Marina, and it's owned by Cemex, which is a multinational corporation based in Mexico. This plant produces valuable commodity, these nice amber-colored grains of lapis sand. And this sand is incredibly useful in concrete, sandblasting, utility trenches, water filtration, golf courses, gardens, you name it. And if you're looking for high-quality sand for a backyard sandbox or a home improvement project, you can pick up a 50-pound bag of this sand for under $5 at local and regional hardware stores. Now, this production is part of a much larger sand-hungry industry. Sand is used in an incredible array of products, from toothpaste, detergents, cosmetics, to computer chips, glass, fiberglass, concrete. It's even used in fracking. It's estimated that to build one medium-sized home, you would need 100 to 200 tons of sand for the materials. Massive amounts of sand are also used for streets, bridges, and highways, and with increasing urbanization worldwide, the need and the demand for sand is growing. Other reporters and documentary filmmakers have covered this huge international demand for sand, a demand that's so high that illegal sand mines have sprung up in India, accompanied by murderous sand mafias. In Singapore, the world's largest sand importer, they use it to artificially expand their territory. This practice has been linked to the disappearance of 24 Indonesian islands. And back home in California, sand mining also has extensive environmental impacts. Removing sand from the coastline can shrink beaches, bringing the ocean right up to the doorsteps of coastal buildings like these ones in Monterey. In the 1980s, the link between coastal erosion and sand mining allowed the shutdown of the other 5 mines in Marina. This was possible because those mines were using massive metal scoops to scrape sand up from the surf line. And the Army Corps of Engineers was able to claim jurisdiction over US waters and ultimately phased out the permits and the leases by 1990. The Lapis plant, however, uses a different method. This barge floating in a pond on the back of the beach dredges up sand from the pond, where it is then transferred to the plant nearby to be washed and dried and packaged. Now, all of these mines were grandfathered in under the Coastal Act of 1976. But after the closure of those other 5 mines, the Lapis plant doubled its take and now extracts almost as much sand as all the other sand mines combined, much to the consternation of coastal advocates, local residents, and the California Coastal Commission. The legacy this sand mining activity leaves is that southern Monterey Bay has the highest coastal erosion rates in the state. Coastal engineers tell me that the beaches and dunes are shrinking on average at about 2 feet per year. This destabilizes the landscape and threatens coastal buildings like this one. This is Stillwell Hall, which was formerly a historic fixture in Fort Ord in Monterey. And it had to be demolished because the sea cliff eroded out from underneath it. The dunes themselves are also home to a number of endangered and threatened species, including the western snowy plover, Smith's blue butterfly, and the black legless lizard. Now, the Coastal Commission has been investigating the Lapis sand mine for violations of the Coastal Act since 2010. 1 year ago this month, they delivered a letter of intent, which is a precursor to a cease and desist order, to Cemex. And they're still in negotiations with the company, so it's unclear whether the mine will be shut down or whether it will simply have to limit its take. But in the middle of all of this ongoing investigation, new claims are surfacing that the mine has doubled its take once again. Now, I'm telling you this story to highlight 3 things that are fundamental to the role of a science writer. First, we try to see the big picture, the context within which the news story occurs. Historic uses of our coastline have changed over time, and notions of what are acceptable have also changed. Our regional sand mining industry fits into a larger national and international industry. Second, stories are often multidimensional, and this one features vested interests on both sides. Cemex is extracting a unique, high-quality sand, which is an important and high-demand commodity. But on the other hand, critics also have a point that this activity is degrading the coastline and threatening buildings and habitats. And third, we try to connect with a broad audience. How many people, myself included, have driven past this funny-looking building on the way to Monterey, wondered what it was, and then forgot about it? How many people, myself included, have gone for long walks on the beach without ever guessing at the importance and the value of the sand beneath my feet? We can use shared experiences like this to inspire and inform a wide array of readers. Telling the story of this sand mine is my small contribution to engaging the public in broader issues of environmental use and degradation. There are no easy answers, but they must come from public engagement with policymakers and elected officials. Rachel Carson was a crusader who shone a light on a scientific truth that woke up a generation. Industry didn't want to hear it. Elected officials didn't want to hear it. The resistance was fierce. As we enter an era in which budget cuts threaten to erode the basic functions of government agencies, and the very existence of the Environmental Protection Agency is in jeopardy, let's not forsake the movement Rachel Carson began. Let's all do our part to stay informed and engaged. And I promise to do my part by continuing to tell the stories. Thank you.
Science writers become experts at so many topics. They're my heroes. Maybe one will run for president one day. So we are very fortunate to have Professor Lori Palmer on the arts faculty at UC Santa Cruz. She came to us 2 years ago from the School of the Arts School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where she taught sculpture and contemporary theory and collaborated with the four-person arts collective called HaHa. Lori's work with colleagues and students on environmental art and social practice reflects our campus values and strengths. Tonight, Lori will talk about the connection between art, materiality, and us.
I'm an artist, and I'm here to talk to you about going underground in a gypsum mine in Indiana. And you may know gypsum as a material that we use to reproduce famous artworks as plaster of Paris. And it's a deliciously smooth, wonderful to work with material. It's a quintessential art material, so that in art schools, everybody who goes through sculpture classes casts their hands at some point. And gypsum is really responsive. It can register all of the minute, wrinkles and fingernails and scars of a body. It's really, really wonderful to work with. And it has the odd quality of getting hot when it solidifies. You might also know gypsum as wallboard, or sheetrock, or drywall, which is something that swathes the insides of all of our houses, especially if they were built after World War II. It's a rigid material, but it's relatively fragile. Both of these materials are made out of gypsum, which is also called calcium sulfate. It's a very common, soft, grayish-white, crumbly rock. And it's made from the excretions of tiny sea creatures that lodged in still pools in the inland seas hundreds of millions of years ago. When I drove to the gypsum mine in Shoals, Indiana, it was a beautiful fall day, fall foliage, clear October, cool, sunny, dappled light. And as soon as I got to the mine, I was suited up and heading underground into the dark right away. Not in an elevator, but in a car on a slant, like at an amusement park ride. My appointed guide, his name was Jeff Hawk. He had sandy hair and aviator glasses, and he told me that the underground has different rules for looking, breathing, and walking. You look by turning on your headlamp, and you have to kind of cock your head because you don't want to stare in anyone's eye with your lamp. The personal savior air canister hooked to your belt will allow you to breathe for exactly 1 hour, breathe carbon dioxide, and as you do that, the mouthpiece will heat up so much it'll burn your lips, but that's exactly when you don't want to let go. And you're breathing carbon dioxide, of course, because oxygen is flammable, and that would burn in the mine. And the personal savior is heavy, and so you have to figure out how to walk. You have to balance it on one side of your hip while the headlamp battery pack is balanced on the other side. So this requires practice in a kind of contrapposto pose you have to establish. So as I absorbed this advice, we slid down into the mine. I got used to the 17-degree tilt, the contrapposto pose, the head slightly cocked, and began to reorient my body and whole cosmos in relation to these new ways of being. The air had been cool up above, but it warmed up as we traveled down, which was counterintuitive to me. 500 feet below the surface, on a shelf outside a small wooden building, thousands of earplugs of varying sizes and shapes and materials, foam and gum, spilled out onto the ground as kind of party favors, saying, "Welcome to the mine." And from that point, Jeff drove me around in a truck to see various activities of scooping, scaling, and bolting that happen inside a mine. He cut the headlights once to let the full darkness of the underground sink in. And this is when I'm cutting the headlights, but it doesn't really work because all the lights are on in here, so you just have to imagine. And Jeff said that it can really get to you. You know, in the winter in Indiana, you go to work in the morning and it's dark, and you work all day illumined only by the truck lights and the spots in the mine, and then you go home and it's already dark when you emerge from the mine. But he said he loved it. He had worked the old Missouri lead belt further east, and so had his father and his grandfather. He felt an affinity for the material that he was working with and for the spaces of the mine. He said the problem with this mine, as opposed to the Missouri mine that he'd come from, was that some of the workers went underground without knowing that the back of the mine was the ceiling. This ignorance about terms indicated for him a basic generational, lack of a generational knowledge and lack of investment in the work that they were doing. The newcomers had no feel for the mine, and Jeff missed the company of seasoned colleagues, people who knew the material that they were working with and had pride in it. I felt a strong resonance with what he was saying because, as an artist, I have a keen interest in knowing my materials and how they behave and what they do. And I want to tell you that this visit to the mine came out of a longer project where I visited 18 mines around the US, where I went underground and also to different wells and other sites of extraction, and eventually made it into a book project called In the Aura of a Whole. Initially with this project, I set out to find out where stuff comes from, stuff like plaster, which artists use, but also stuff that all of us use every day, like wallboard. And I began to think about these sites of extraction as if they were spider bites in the land, with the redness around a bite that forms on your skin, like the aura of effects around these extraction sites, whether it's environmental or social or economic. And I expected to find underground and at all of these sites all of the horrors that you might imagine that come from massive excavations at non-human scales. And I also expected to meet workers who didn't want to be doing what they were doing, who were only doing it because they had no other choice because of economic reasons. But I was surprised to meet a number of these men, like Jeff, who had more intimate understandings of and relations with the material that they were working with. Again and again, I encountered this. And at one point in my tour of the gypsum mine, Jeff stopped the truck and shone his headlights on a pile of discarded rock. He said he wanted to find me a really nice piece of selenite. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a transparent, crystalline form of gypsum that's also called satin spar, or this term I love, which is fallen lunar foam. And I could tell by how Jeff handled this pile of discarded rock that there was a certain kind of care as he extended to the mineral world, as if he felt an affinity with that mineral world. And so this brings me to the title of the talk. If I were you, I'd call me us. And this is a quote from a poem by Ogden Nash. I don't know if you know this. And I use the title to refer to this sense of continuity between the materials of the earth and the materials of our own bodies as humans. So if you think of calcium, for instance, and you can see, this is an alternate periodic table from the early 20th century, and calcium's up here, and this is the lightest materials, and these are the heaviest. Some of these are not even invented yet. So calcium is a primary component of gypsum, calcium sulfate, but it's also a primary component of the structural integrity of our bodies, our bones and our teeth. And so it's this kind of recognition that we are made of the same stuff, the earth and our bodies, people and earth, that threads together the environmental and social questions that I think should be thought together, but that have historically been separated. So if you think about some of what my colleague Emma was saying right before when she was talking about environmental issues as if they were against employment issues, when actually they need to be thought at the same time. When I visited these extraction sites, my body always seemed out of place in relation to the scale of the excavations, and also the presence of free-floating toxins. This is a pile of mullock from a mine in Utah that was over 100 years of excavation, became its own new mountain. And also the machines that would not notice a living thing. But I also felt an unexpected intimacy with the material and the place. And this was partly because of how the guides conveyed their knowledge to me. I want to be changed by what I do. This surprise in the process of my research got me thinking, how could we do this differently? We are dependent on the earth for everything that we use and eat. But because we're material bodies that are vulnerable and mortal, we try to exert a kind of killing control over the body and matter of the earth, as if we could conquer our own vulnerability by conquering it. What would it be like to consider our interactions with the material world not as dominators of it, but as collaborators with it? So now I'm going to take you back up to the surface, back to the wallboard plant that sits right on top of the gypsum mine. So there are about 60 factories in the US that make wallboard now. There's so much wallboard produced in the US that you could build a wall 14 feet high from here to the moon with that in 1 year's production, or you could build a 250 high foot wall, since we're talking about walls in the US these days, that would circumnavigate the equator of the Earth. So I got a little glimpse of this enormity inside the factory, standing at the one end of a 900-foot building, looking down a 900-foot conveyor belt, watching a 900-foot piece of wallboard extruded down through that space. And I'm not going to show you any pictures inside the factory because, like many places that I visited, they wouldn't let me photograph inside there, so I have to ask you to help conjure this in your mind. So where I stood, heavy suspended canvas bags, they were like pastry dough, spewed the gypsum out between two layers of paper onto the conveyor belt. And so one thick stream in the middle of this doughy like gypsum and a stream on either side came out, and then the top sheet of paper descended to complete the drywall sandwich that then passed under a bar that registered how thick that drywall would be, if it's 1/2 inch or 3/4, if any of you work with drywall. And then as it flattened out and went down this conveyor, it precisely filled the 4-foot measure at the desired thickness with no ooze or drip. This conveyor travels at the full 900 feet in 5 minutes. By the time the wallboard reached the end of the factory, it had hardened and could be cut in 8-foot sections that were then flipped like a pancake and sent back through the dryer. And after drawing another machine called the Hooker Booker, flipped one finished board face to face, and then an actual person taped these two boards together, slapped on a barcode, and the unit was slid into a waiting truck. There's just-in-time production, no inventory. Vince was my guide in the factory. He seemed at one with the workings of his machines, precise, oiled, efficient, all about numbers and production goals. He told me that the length of the conveyor belt, and hence of the building, was carefully calibrated in relation to the time it takes for the gypsum plaster to harden. They would have liked to produce more wallboard, but in order to do that, they would have had to make the building even longer, because the time the gypsum plaster took to harden was the one part of the whole operation they couldn't change. They couldn't speed that up. So this, to me, is one example of matter pushing back, and it tells us what to do, even though we think we're controlling it. In fact, we're always already collaborating with materiality. Whenever we make anything, whether it's art or mining or factory production or any exchanges with materials of the earth, we don't approach it, however, as collaboration, and we don't respect our collaborators. And our collaborators are the rest of the material earth, which we're also a part of and can't be separated from. This is part of what the miners taught me. It may not be how they saw it, but I think it's the very fact that we could communicate on the level of materiality was a really important start. I want to tell you in conclusion that this image of wallboard that I showed you at the beginning is actually an art installation. And it's by an artist named Dan Peterman. And just to add a twist to the story of gypsum, 50% of the gypsum that we produce in the US is synthetic gypsum. It's not mined from rock. It's not pulled out from underground. It's made from industrial pollution. So what happens is that the sulfur dioxide that comes through the coal-burning power plants is captured in these out of these stacks, and it's mixed with lime, and voila, that's calcium sulfate, which is a synthetic gypsum. And so what Dan Peterman did to bring this into visibility was convince the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago to use only synthetic gypsum in the construction of their new museum. And he also convinced them, before the museum was built, to exhibit all of the wallboard, or a sample of the wallboard they were going to use, as a sculpture in the museum. And the idea was that it was presented as captured and materialized air pollution, solidified and stabilized, so it was kept from floating around in our air and forming acid rain. And there are a lot of complexities and contradictions in this art project, but that is what art can be really good at, presenting us with contradictions and complexities that raise questions and don't provide easy answers. Thank you.
Wow, that was a great convergence of art and science and technology and the environment and a wonderful story. That was great, thank you. Our final talk for the evening takes us into the highest reaches of the Rocky Mountains and into the future. Erica Zavaleta is a professor and field scientist in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Department. She's doing frontline climate change research and nurturing the next generation of Rachel Carsons, environmental leaders as diverse as the state and the nation. Please welcome Erica.
Thank you. And thanks for hanging with us here to the end. I want to try to end on a hopeful note and talk a little bit to you today about the future of conservation. So, the next generation challenges of Rachel Carson's time included things like the advent of synthetic chemicals, radioactive substances, poisons like DDT, and songbirds were at the center of Silent Spring, and of Carson's efforts to alert the world to the dangers of what were, in 1962, the newly emerging great threats to life on Earth. So she wrote in the first chapter of Silent Spring the following: "There was a strange stillness. The birds, for example, where had they gone? On the mornings that had once throbbed with a dawn chorus of robins, catbirds, doves, jays, wrens, and scores of other bird voices, there was now no sound. Only silence lay over the fields and woods and marsh." And just a few years after Silent Spring was published and brought to light the extent of our impacts on Earth, the Apollo moon missions made it possible for us to see for the first time our planet for what it was, a finite and delicate home in the infinite void of space. So the Earth is our only home, but we're not the only residents experiencing the extent of our impacts on it. We live in a world experiencing unprecedented biodiversity loss, with rates of extinction that are over 50 times faster than background and climbing. And this figure shows you what high proportions of the 3 best studied groups are threatened now with extinction in red. Almost a sixth of all birds, a quarter of all mammals, and almost a half of all of the amphibians on our planet. Now think about that for a minute, those huge proportions likely gone in the space of a few centuries, which is much faster than the extinctions that ended the age of the dinosaurs. We also live with increasing disruptions to the Earth's climate and atmosphere. So California's setting at the land-sea interface exposes us to everything from sea level rise and ocean acidification to declining snowpack, drought, heat events, and wildfires. And so as a scientist, I work at the interface of these 2 greatest next-generation challenges that we face today, the loss of Earth's biological diversity and the increasing changes that we're bringing about to the world's climate and atmosphere. And these are next-generation challenges because they require integrated solutions that cut across scales, from local to international, and also because we have to solve them. They affect everything and everyone. So today I want to talk about these 2 linked areas. Next-generation conservation challenges call for next-generation conservation leaders. And I want to tell you about some of the research in my lab to address these next-generation challenges, and also about how we involve and support students at UC Santa Cruz to become that next generation of conservation leaders. So today, climate change is one of these huge next-gen challenges, and many things are affected, including Rachel Carson's songbirds. These are the rosy finches, the highest elevation breeding birds in North America, and they span from the top of Alaska all the way down to the southernmost reaches of their distribution, right in the Sierras here around Mount Whitney, and over in southwestern Colorado in the San Juans. And they are North America's climate change canaries, restricted to these cold, snowpack-dominated mountaintops. And because of where they live, we know almost nothing about them. They nest in cliffs near the tops of our highest mountains, and that lack of knowledge prevents anyone from managing them effectively, even though they're now among the top 20 land birds of concern on the continent. So they're hard to get to, but that doesn't make them safe from the impacts of climate and other environmental changes. This is Mitre Basin in the Sierras, and it's a beautiful laboratory for me and my collaborators and students to learn about these birds in. You have to go there to to really experience at this place, almost 12,000 feet above sea level, the miracle of these little birds living up there. The weather is constantly changing. You can get heat stroke and frostbite in the same day. There's about half as much oxygen here as there is down here at sea level. So every year we get up there and one student goes running and the rest of us all kind of stagger around dizzy for a couple of days. And so our research questions up here start simple. Questions like, how many rosy finches are there and are they declining? And then the questions ripple out. What are they eating? And how are those things affected by all of these different climate changes? And then how else are they affected by faraway activities like the production of agricultural dust that also have an impact on these high alpine environments? So some of our research is really low-tech and labor-intensive. We capture birds, we ban them, we let them go, and then we just go looking for them the next year to see who's come back. We count seeds, we count bugs. And then some of our work is more high-tech. We deploy sensor arrays to monitor temperature, to monitor snowpack depth. We use the stable isotopes of elements like carbon and nitrogen in the feathers of the birds to see what it was that they were eating all of the previous year and where they were when they were eating it. And then we collect DNA samples to map population genetic structure to try to figure out how birds in different places cope with the particular challenges of their homes. So in part, we aim to make things like a map like this. This was constructed by my research partners for another migratory songbird, the Wilson's warbler, right there. And so ultimately, we can use all of this knowledge to conserve these birds and the mountaintop ecosystems where they live, that they're integrating across the continent. But it will be this ongoing effort, because changes are ongoing, to protect rosy finches and all of these other imperiled species. So we're seeking to move from our initial study sites here in the Sierras and here in southwest Colorado across the whole arc of the continent, and in doing that, to involve a lot of undergraduate students in our work who can see these places firsthand and be part of studying them and conserving them. And we involve a lot of students because they're the ones who can run with this experience and translate it into new science and new solutions over their careers. A professor is just one person, but our students are the whole generation, and they're the generation that will have to solve these challenges. So this is work I do through research and the opportunities it provides, but also through broader and more explicit efforts to prepare this next generation of conservation leaders. And so in 2015, I started a program at UC Santa Cruz called the Doris Duke Conservation Scholars Program. And it identifies talented freshmen and sophomores from a national pool. We host them at UC Santa Cruz, and we support them all the way through their majors to positions of leadership in science and conservation. And we take them through 2 intensive summer programs. The first of field science experiences centered at UC Santa Cruz, the second in applied conservation internships throughout the US. And we build in mentoring and support year-round, and we focus on relationship, on building a strong professional network and a close community of peers and mentors. So we emphasize these 3 pieces in our approach. First, we support diverse students in our programs, valuing this wide array of ideas and perspectives to help solve these problems, and I'll say more about that in a minute. We also emphasize innovation over the ability to follow instructions, and because we want to be preparing our students to be creative scientists and practitioners, and then we prepare them to be leaders and change makers. And so we're not so much interested in just having our students be employable. We want them to be able to make things happen that otherwise wouldn't, and to be able to make their good ideas into realities. So I'll say a little bit more about each one of these things. Building inclusion in our field has been underway for decades without enough success. So at every stage, including college, pursuing a profession in the environmental field has been challenging for women, for students of color, for people who face financial obstacles, and really along every other major axis of diversity. For example, in our field in red, this is ethnic diversity in the environmental field. And you can see that it lags in green at the top here, not only the overall demographics of the US, but also in blue in the middle here, the diversity of science and engineering in general. So it's really kind of behind the curve, literally. And why is this a problem? Why is this important to address? Well, first, for conservation to have broader appeal, right? So that more people can see themselves in it and support it. Second, broader relevance to connect to the priorities of more people, because everybody cares about land and air and water and wildlife, just maybe not all in the same ways. Finally, diverse conservation works differently. It performs better. And this is partly because it embraces more new talent, more good people who, because of various obstacles, from financial to cultural, haven't had access to careers in science and conservation. The evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould wrote, "I'm less interested in the weight of Einstein's brain than in the near certainty that people of equal talent have lived and died in cotton fields and sweatshops. We can't keep missing these people." Diversity of experiences and cultures also makes all of us do our work better. We know this from other fields. We know this from finance, we know this from law, where, for example, legal scholars have shown that diverse juries consider wider perspectives, deliberate longer, make fewer inaccurate statements. So it is harder to work with people who are different from you. You can't fall back on shared experiences and values. But that's not an inefficiency, because we're not after faster and easier in conservation, we're after better. Now, alongside equity and inclusion, we work to cultivate innovation and leadership, and we do that by emphasizing, in particular, hands-on experiential learning driven by students' interests and curiosity. And we do this to build their confidence and expertise at designing solutions themselves. So we spend a lot of time in the field. This is a group of students who are learning to identify intertidal animals so that they can design a study about how urbanization affects tide pool communities. So in the first Conservation Scholars Summer, the students design all of the projects themselves. That's a really different skill from helping someone else carry out a project that's already been designed. We want them to figure out what the important questions are and how to tackle them, and to draw as social entrepreneurs on the resources around them, and then to tell us what they found. And so this approach also hones their practical skills for graduate school and beyond, and it sets us apart from pretty much every other field science-based program that we are aware of, and the students know it. So we're proud that this year our 20 top choice students, all of them accepted UCSC's offer to join the Scholars Program for 2017. And then beyond the field-based, thanks, yay. So beyond those opportunities to cultivate innovation and scientific leadership, field-based experiential learning is also a way to build strong relationships among students, with their mentors, and all of that allows them to grow the networks that will carry them forward in the future. Finally, as many of our students haven't had a chance to spend time in nature, and so this great big lap of the state that we do together is a first chance for them to do that, to see California beyond their backyards, and to reflect on what their roles are in it. So through these kinds of experiences, our students find their ways to having an impact on the field as scientists and as professionals. And Crystal Reinaga, who's a marine biology student from UCSC, is just one example. She took our UCSC field course in 2012. Here she is in 2012. And she's went on to intern with a group at UCSC studying evolution in fishes. And now she's a year from finishing her PhD at UC Irvine, where she studies the evolution of animal locomotion, and also where she teaches and mentors students all the way from kindergarten to master's degree candidates, bringing them on board too. So it's a dream of mine to raise an endowment for the UCSC Conservation Scholars Program so that we can continue forever to apply UCSC's strengths across these areas of diversity, research excellence, experiential learning, and these wild spaces that serve as classrooms. And so that in the spirit of Rachel Carson, we can support these incredible students in their work long term. They're the future of conservation, and the world needs them to lead it. There's a lot to do. These songbirds and countless other species are counting on us. Thanks.
I think what we're going to do is we have coffee and desserts and refreshments in the room, and all our speakers will be around here, so we'll allow you to talk to them individually if you have questions. I hope you have a takeaway tonight and you learned something interesting. For those of you who are alumni or parents, please rediscover UC Santa Cruz. Come up and visit. Keep us in your travel plans. Please keep us in your philanthropic plans. We need your support as well. Thank you for coming tonight.